Okay, so I think we'll get started. It's just after 11 o'clock, and I see people, some friendly faces coming into the Zoom room. So my name is Bob Ortong. I'm a research professor here at the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at the Elliott School of George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And we're very happy to have our guest speaker today, Margarita Balmaceda, who's a professor of diplomacy and international relations at Seton Hall University, and she's currently in Cambridge. So her talk is entitled Russian Energy Chains, Threat or Temptation. And this is a book presentation of her new book, which I highly recommend. I just started reading it myself. Russian Energy Chains, The Making of Technopolitics from Siberia to Ukraine to the European Union. So Margarita's been working on this topic for a long time and pretty much knows everything there is to know. So Margarita, the floor is yours, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Am I visible? Is everything working?
Yes, it looks like you're visible and your slides are also visible. So I think
excellent. Well, the first thing I want to say is that it is simply amazing and such a good fortune to be able to present my book here at IARES, at the Institute of European, Russian and Eurasian Studies at George Washington for many reasons. First, because the kind of research that is being done there fits in very well with the book. The Institute is covering basically the entire chain. I am covering in my book, not only the Russian side of the question, but up to the European Union side. And I think this is really fantastic to be able to have a discussion with you, with colleagues that are working not only on the Russian side, but in the larger implications of these dynamics. Secondly, my host today, Bob Ortong, has done tremendously interesting work on an issue that is very, very much related to some of the things I discuss in the book. That is the issue of urban sustainability in cities, which in many cases, in the Arctic, which in many cases are touched and even created by their interaction with the fossil fuel industry. So that is a tremendous perspective, and I'm looking forward to interesting discussions and comments and criticisms from Bob as well. At a more personal level, I'm really excited to present my book here because actually this book got its start during the year when I was a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, I believe 2015, 2016, which tells you how long it took to write. But during that year, I had the opportunity of participating in some events at the Institute and to see firsthand what a tremendous place it is, what a nurturing place, and what a wonderful place for the development of new ideas. So thank you for the opportunity to share my ideas within this very unique and special context. So basically what I will do today is to present you kind of the larger issues that I deal with in the book. And yes, this is the book, Russian Energy Chains. And then we can move to a discussion, to questions, and then perhaps I can go in more detail about some of the issues that I deal with in the chapters. So let me see if I can. Yes, so basically, I see this book in the interface between more theoretical approaches to energy and concrete studies of energy policy. To the left of this picture is a book that I actually started to read when I was in DC, in the Wilson Center, Jeff Malcolm's The Political Economy of Pipelines, a very theoretical but very rich book. To the right is one edited volume by Pami Alto from the University of Tampere on Russia's energy policies. And of course, I could have chosen a different example for that. But in this book, I try to kind of bring together the theoretical and the policy aspects of this question It was not an easy endeavor, but I hope I did a reasonable good job at both. And in the bottom of this picture is a Hungarian magazine, Kalandrafel, going into an adventure, because it was indeed an adventure. So basically, what I am trying to get at in this exercise, in this book, is to look at threat and temptation as two sides in participation in Russian energy chains. So the basic point here, and I'll go into that in more detail, is that we need to look at the entire value chain, not just at supply, to understand this interplay. And I will walk you through that in a moment. So looking at the entire value chain, from upstream, which is usually in Siberia, not necessarily in the Arctic, but perhaps in other parts of Siberia, through the midstream, often going through Ukraine, to the European Union. And I will get back to that in more detail in a moment. So in the book, I'm following 3 molecules, or quote unquote molecules, through this journey. These are actual journeys, they're not imagined journeys. And through that journey, I'm trying to answer a couple of questions which are important for me. But and these questions are both empirical, they're related to theory, and they're also historical. In terms of the empirical question, I'm trying to understand how has participation in these energy chains, which are at the end of the day Russian export chains, how has it affected power relationships? And this is also a question that requires a little bit more digging into theory, because I'm understanding power here not simply as power of supply, not simply as external power, but also as what Duval has called power two, that is constitutive power in actors themselves, including domestically in the countries involved in this change. So it's looking at energy not simply as a source of external power, but as a constituent force of domestic power. At a theoretical level, and this was perhaps the hardest part of the book, I'm trying to understand how the materiality, how the material characteristics of different energy goods affect what you can do with this. And this required a lot of work, a lot of learning on my part, because I'm not a natural scientist. But basically the idea is that the materiality, the technical constraints associated with the materiality of different types of energy are going to affect how you transport it, how you trade it, and even how you can steal it. And not to speak of the way in which you can use it for power purposes, both domestically and internationally. So that is kind of the theoretical question. And the historical question basically is, well, how did participation in Russian energy chains shape political life in post-Soviet societies? And especially when we're looking at a very formative period, the first 25 years of independent life after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And in doing this, I am trying to answer important theoretical questions, but I am also trying to go beyond a purely academic book, because I am not devoting the entire book to one type of energy. I am dealing with 3 types of energy: natural gas, oil, and coal. I am covering 3 areas, going from Siberia through Ukraine to the European Union, through the travelogue of these 3 molecules. So for those readers who may not be so interested in theory, they can still follow that travelogue and get an important part of the analysis through the travelogue of those molecules. And while the technical learning was very important for my work in this book, and while understanding the technology behind what you can do with the materiality of these different types of energy is really important. And while that is really key for understanding how you can use energy politically, I try to do that, but I also try to do it in a way that both respects the reader's ability to learn, but also makes it as easy as possible. That is why I have a glossary at the end of the book where I explain all the different technical processes I'm talking about in each of these types of energy. And I also have other aids at the end of the book, so that if somebody were to be using this in a course, in a class on energy politics or European politics, some key elements would be easier to understand. So I'm trying to do a lot of things with the book. I don't know whether it's successful in doing that, but at least I had a lot of fun doing it. But what is the prehistory? Why am I interested in this, and why did I decide to devote so much time to this? I think we can talk about kind of two elements of the prehistory of this book. One element, which is kind of older and is also related to some of my other work, is my discomfort with the way the phrase Russian energy weapon was used, especially in the maybe 5-10 years ago, because that idea of a Russian energy weapon, as it was deployed in the media and continues to be deployed in the media, assumed energy was some kind of undifferentiated whole, did not differentiate between types of energy, did not really treat technology seriously. And something that was really very important for my earlier work on this topic, it really treated energy-dependent states, energy consumer states in the former Soviet Union, simply as victim entities that were simply exposed to victims of Russian policy with no say or no agency of their own. So basically, in a lot of the work under this perspective, there was a supplier country, there were the energy-dependent states, such as Ukraine, and then it was simply assumed that those states had no agency. And basically what I did in a couple of other books I wrote was I started to look at that black box. I didn't feel that looking at those states as simply subjects was either accurate or was just. We are basically reifying dependency if we do not give voice to the agency of this state. So I worked on this black box for a number of years. I tried to look at what was happening domestically in countries like Ukraine and Belarus, who were the winners and losers in different types of energy interactions with Russia, how this related to governance and corruption. Could we talk about situation of hijacking of energy policy? So in that work, I look at things like what domestic political factors may hinder the development of a real proactive energy policy. That was the main question in this book, where I looked specifically at Ukrainian energy corruption. I look at how different domestic political systems affected the way post-Soviet states that were dependent on Russian energy dealt with that dependency. And this is my 2013 book on the politics of energy dependency, where I compared that situation in the case of Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania to find out, interestingly, that it was not only the type of political system that affected the way those states would deal with energy relations with Russia, but actually that would come back and have a kind of circular feeding back into the process, and would affect the political system as well. And in the last book in that series, I look at how energy interactions, which actually had a lot to do with technology, allowed a quote-unquote client state to manipulate its relationship with its much larger patron, Russia. So this book looks specifically at the case of Belarus, and how the manipulation of energy policies and discourses allowed a particular relationship with Russia, but also allows a certain type of authoritarianism to remain in place. So after I spent all this time writing all those books, something clicked, telling me that I did not have the entire story. And I knew that these states were not simply subjects of Russian policy. I knew that many individuals and groups within those dependent states benefited from participation in those Russian energy chains. But I had looked at that mainly through the prism of corruption. And what I came to understand after all those years working on those other 2 books was that actually the ambiguous attitude, the ambiguity in the participation in those chains was not simply about corruption. Even if you were to take corruption out of the picture, which some would argue is a little bit hard, but you could, at least analytically, even if rent-seeking did not kidnap state policy, there was still ambiguity in terms of these states' approach and understanding of their role in the Russian energy chains. Because even if you take corruption out of the picture, there were still very important benefits that states like Ukraine could gain from participating in those energy chains. So there has been, and even today, even after 2014, there continues to be a serious tension between 2 goals. One, to diversify away from Russia, but on the other hand, to strengthen the country, maintain and strengthen the country's role in those Russian supply chains as a way to continue to receive transit fees, other profits that may be related to processing of energy, but also as part of a geopolitical structure or geopolitical geometry that allows that role as a transit state or as a processing state to increase the international power of a country like Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia by triangulating the relationship and making Ukraine an important player also in relations with the EU. So when you look at energy a little bit deeper, you see that there have been very important goals, sometimes in tension. On the one hand, pool goals to diversify away from Russia, to have access to other types of energy or other sources of energy, be it in the form of US LNG, be it in the forms of Norwegian natural gas or oil, but also you can see the continuation of what I would call push goals to continue playing a role in the value-added chains of Russia's energy as a way to maintain leverage and to continue to participate in those profitable value-added chains. And basically, this is the situation of Ukraine 7.5 years or almost 8 years after Russia's military incursion in Ukraine, because we're talking about a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia has already invaded Ukraine. Even almost 8 years after this military incursion, Ukraine is facing the same dilemmas. And as we see in the case of Nord Stream, is trying very hard to remain part of those chains. So that ambiguity remains above and beyond corruption. So what are the key concepts that come up in this book? The idea of relationship with Russia as not simply threat, but also as an opportunity and temptation, and not only for corrupt actors. And the way I look at this is I don't look simply at supply. I don't look simply at the trans-border aspect, but I look at the entire change to see how different actors have been benefiting or have been interplaying here. And what we see here is that even when we have paid most of our attention to Ukraine, and I myself have worked a lot on Ukraine, you can see that tension between energy relations with Russia as opportunity and as threat also in other cases. In the case of Lithuania, with the desire in the 2000s to have a pipeline going through Lithuania, the Lithuanian desire to maintain a refinery working with Russian oil for refining and transshipment. In the case of Belarus, we see it very clearly through the benefits that Belarus acquires through transit and also refining. But we also certainly see it in the case of European states and firms, and undoubtedly the issue of Nord Stream 2 and the participation of European Union companies into the project raises this very clearly. So we see that interplay between threat and temptation, not only in Ukraine, we also see it in Russia. We have a whole system of political control and investment based on fossil fuels. If you want a strong statement on this, you can look at the book of my colleague Felipe Katinkinen on the energy of Russia. But then there is also the temptation of a renewables superpower role in Russia. And one of the things I do in this book is I try to look at how that interaction between threat and temptation takes place differently in different energy goods, exactly because of their different materiality. So, for example, in the case of natural gas, you have a lot of elements of threat, but you can also have an element of temptation having to do, for example, with the importance of transit fees, the importance of transit even as a way to keep domestic systems viable. And all of this goes back to the theoretical issue of materiality, which is really the theoretical underpinning of the book, because, for example, a lot of the things that you can and cannot do with natural gas have to do with the materiality of natural gas, and in particular with the fact that natural gas is a gas where, in order to keep it flowing, it needs to be under a certain pressure, and that need to maintain pressure affects the entire chain. You cannot maintain, for example, a transit system under a certain degree of load of the pipeline, because it simply will not flow, or it would be very expensive to move with additional compressors. But it also means that domestically, it comes to play a different role, as, for example, there are a lot of pressures for maintaining transit, because if you do not have that level of load of the pipeline, you may not have the possibility of stable functioning domestic supply system. And that is why the natural gas chapter of the book is called Natural Gas Managing Pressure from Western Siberia to the Nuremberg power plant in Germany. And it's really very, very interesting how natural gas production, supply, transit, as affected by the issue of regulating pressure, is really essential for understanding the role of different actors. Also, it's crucial for understanding historically, for example, the role of Ukraine. Because if you look at the beginnings of Soviet natural gas exports, if you look even at Russian natural gas exports, Ukraine, its unique system of pipelines, its unique system of underground storage facilities has allowed for that pressure management to happen successfully in a way that Russia could not have done without it. So these are ways in which the materiality of that particular good affects that relationship. In the case of oil, you see a kind of different interplay of threat and temptation, where you have a very important role played by refining, which is a role that in some ways is also related to transit, and in the case of Ukraine, for example, domestic manipulations concerning refining, the oligarchical control of certain refineries came to affect also the transit issue. In the case of oil, you have a good that is much more commodifiable, is a good that has a different role in the international global economy of energy, and that also opens new opportunities for players within that sector, in the sense of both the marketing of oil and the purchase of oil. I spoke a few minutes ago about the role of Ukraine in these chains, and I want to emphasize how important this is, and how when we look at Ukraine now as a taker of Russian policies, we also need to look at Ukraine's role exactly in that management. And I want to make reference to the book of a dear colleague of mine, a member of my study group at the Hans Wissenschaftskolleg in Germany, Per Hoxelius, Red Gas. Russia and the origins of European energy dependency. There's a lot in this book about Ukraine, again, emphasizing how Ukraine played a very key role in the management of that pressure issue that made it possible, even made it possible for that whole system of exports to come into place in the first time. In the case of coal, we have a kind of different situation because of two things. First, because of the key materiality of coal as a high bulk, low value good, which implies a particular role of labor in this game in a way that is not exactly the same as in the case of natural gas or oil, where you can engage in the transportation and trade of this good with less human labor. This key difference in materiality between coal and natural gas or oil played a very important role in two things. First, in allowing a system of subsidies to play a huge role in the coal sector, in particular in Ukraine, and in allowing key Ukrainian oligarchs to monopolize that sector through monopolizing those subsidies via appeals to the role of labor. So if you look at the coal chapter of my book, it's called Managing Subsidies from Kuzbass to the Donbass to Germany. And here, of course, I owe a big debt to Mitchell's 2011 book, where he very clearly talks about the role of labor in coal in the shaping of a certain politics, especially in the UK and in Europe before the start of the oil era in the 1940s. So what does all of this mean in terms of looking forward? We talk very often about Nord Stream. We talk about the Mariupol blockade, which is very much related to the coal chain, because let me go back for a moment, one of the key elements of the coal chain that makes it also different from natural gas and oil is the fact that coal is really important in two value chains. One, perhaps the chain we most often think about, the electricity production chain, but coal also plays a really important role in steel making, in particular in the main technologies used today in steel making. And exactly that dual role of coal in two important supply and value chains allows individuals controlling that sector to play a really important role. Why does that relate to Mariupol? Because Mariupol is the location of really two very important steel factories in Ukraine. It is also the port from which a lot of those steel exports that are related to coal are exported. And we often think about Russian power through the issue of Nord Stream, through the issue of Mariupol. But there are also a number of other issues that we need to think about. We need to think about how countries like Ukraine, which are part of this chain, are adjusting to new ways of looking at energy space. And here, I mean, in particular, the new initiatives by the European Union to create a world of energy contracts that is not based on unidirectional chains or unidirectional corridors that are related to the transportation of these goods, but which are more based on the free, quote unquote, free competition of molecules in the market. How does Ukraine, for example, position itself vis-a-vis this? Is Ukraine's attempt to remain a key player in natural gas transit also a way in which Ukraine is tying itself to older views of looking at the energy space in Europe? These are open questions. And no less important is the issue of how do these chains move forward or are challenged by the carbon constraints we are facing now, and by the way in which the policies of key players such as the European Union are being very deeply shaped by those carbon constraints. When we look at European Union policies, for example, concerning duties on high embedded carbon products, high CO2 embedded products such as steel, such as fertilizers, such as chemicals, what does that do to states and producers which have benefited from the subsidies, from a subsidy system that is exactly highly related to a fossil fuel chain? These are very important challenges, which tell me that the power of these chains will continue to be part of our picture much longer than one particular disagreement or one particular debate about Nord Stream. I'm going to close my few remarks now. There's a lot to be said. Some of you may want to buy this book. If you don't want to buy this book, in many libraries, it's available through the Grutter as an electronic text, where you can download the chapters as if you would download an article. And if you don't want to read the whole book, but you're very curious, I would in particular suggest that you read the first chapter, where I question our understanding of energy politics and of particularly of our view of Ukraine. And I would also highly recommend the coal chapter. I hope we can have a discussion, a separate discussion about coal, because it's fascinating. It was very, very hard to learn about all these different coal technologies as related to metallurgy, but it's also, I believe, holds the key to a lot of the challenges that countries like Russia and Ukraine will be facing in this carbon constrained world. So finally, I simply want to thank all the people who helped me in this project, all the organizations, and look forward to some interesting comments and discussions. Okay, did I lose you? No.
No.
Do we have a technical problem or not? No.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Sorry, it looks like, unfortunately, the GW internet connection is not as strong as it should be, I'm afraid. But hopefully.
Well, I'm sure it's probably my connection.
No, I think something's going on here. But so please, are there any questions to Margarita? Yes, Martin. Go ahead.
Hello, Martin.
Can you unmute or?
Sorry, yeah. I hope you can hear me now. Margarita, nice to see you again.
Wonderful, thank you.
Not in person. Thank you for your presentation and for the book. You know, I like it. I love it. And I think it's very, very important that you pointed out the importance of understanding the whole supply chain and the difference between the individual commodities, as natural gas cannot be used as a tool the same way as it is in case of oil or other commodities. So so I think this is really important to understand vis-a-vis the EU market, vis-a-vis the transit countries, and basically the whole Central Eastern European region. I think this is very often, unfortunately, is overlooked, and I've seen many researchers that put these various communities on the same level, which is obviously wrong. So thank you once again for pointing to the differences. So my question, or I would like to hear your comments on, and you touched upon this. So what do you see is the way out of the dependency between the dependency on Russian supply chains, and obviously I have mainly natural gas in mind, and whether you see that the common market within the European Union with its rules can be the cure. I'll be curious what you think on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Do you mean the common EU market as extended to countries like Ukraine, or within the EU?
Well, both actually, because I mean, lately we've seen a development that the EU tries to extend the rules beyond the actual borders of the EU energy market with the update to the liberalization package in 2019. So I think the progress is there, that the market rules will be expanding, and also those relations that were outside the market, that have been outside the market until now, will be impacted, as we see with Nord Stream 2. So my question is, more general, whether you think that this can be the cure to the to the issue of energy dependency, the chronic dependency that we see in Central Eastern Europe, because from what I see, also what I saw in the row between the US and the EU vis-a-vis Nord Stream 2, I saw there was a slight, how do I put it, that from the US perspective, probably the appreciation for the EU market rules were not as big as you would guess, given the impact the rules have had on the distribution and energy security in Europe. So my question, to put it simply, is whether you think that the EU market rules are the actual cure to the chronic dependency of the Central and Eastern Europe, and can be the cure to the politicization of the relations between Russia, the transit countries, and some European countries, some customers. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. A very rich question. And I just want to flag that this topic of EU rules has made a lot of lawyers very, very rich. Not sure if it has made a lot of academics very rich, but a lot of lawyers very rich. So my answer is a qualified yes, but I need to kind of walk back a little bit to flag a couple of things. The first thing is that we have seen in the last 10 years, or actually 13 years since the 2007 energy package, a tension between two sources of EU policy and two kind of impetus of EU energy policy, in particular concerning natural gas. One, the understanding of energy security, the desire to diversify, not to receive more than quote unquote 30% from one source. That has been kind of a strong geopolitical energy security impetus for EU policies. On the other hand, a no less strong impetus to liberalize the markets. And again, this was not an impetus that started with energy per se. It started with the telecommunications. It started with other sectors. And those two sources of policy have been in tension in a way that perhaps does not lead to the best results. And now, since 2019, we have a third source of policy as an inspiration, which is the desire to decarbonize. Until now, it's not been as prominent as the others, but it's becoming very prominent, for example, through priorities in EU investments. But how does this work out in terms of answering your question? So what we see is that a lot of the EU policies towards liberalization of the energy market, in particular the natural gas markets, assumes that these molecules are kind of free individuals that can simply be bought and sold in the market. The problem with this is that by moving away from a contractual system, a governance system that existed before based on long-term contracts, based on destination fees and things like that, it's good to move away from that. But the new system, assuming the molecules as free agents, ignores, for example, the key issue of where these molecules are coming from. Is the fact that these molecules are free, does that compensate from the fact that they are coming from Russia through Nord Stream 2 in a pipeline that is not going to be able to not only Nord Stream 2, but the pipeline coming from Greifswald south to the Czech Ukrainian border, sorry, Czech German border. Does that compensate for that? And secondly, does that view of those molecules as free agents compensate for the fact that this new system does not have a real solution to the issue of investments, and does not have a real solution or a real answer to the issue of how to distribute, how to share the risks associated with natural gas supply? In the old system, with long-term contracts, there was a way of sharing that risk between producers and consumers. In the new system, there is no real answer to this question. Nevertheless, I do think that it's an important step forward. I think to really have an impact, it would also need to come together with real initiatives towards local use of renewables, so that there is less reliability or less reliance on a grill. And the fact that these changes are important are seen not only by the strength of the push to apply those rules also to other countries, members of the energy community, such as Ukraine, but for example, through the movement towards pushing the change in the contractual in the contractual arrangements for Russian natural gas sales that were currently the point of exchanges in the Russian Slovak border. Sorry, in the Ukrainian Slovak border, but to change that to the Russian Ukrainian border, so that that part of the journey would also be covered by EU rules. So qualified, yes, is a step forward, but it doesn't take care of two key issues, meaning the provenance of the molecules and also investment.
Okay, thank you, Margarita. So we have another question from John. John, if you'd like to unmute and go ahead.
Yeah, would you talk a little bit about energy inefficiency, particularly in Ukraine? I ran across some numbers once in which they tried to figure out what was the worldwide average for BTUs per unit of output. And the worldwide average was about 10. The United States was better than that, about 7. And British, it's something like 4. Ukraine was 55. That may go back to the old Soviet days, where maybe they should have stayed in the Soviet Union and continued to subsidize their oil. But they aren't. And is there a way of doing something about that? And Ukraine has now become, I think, the poorest country in Europe. In 1989, it was somewhat better per capita GDP than Poland. Now it's got about 1/4 GDP of Poland per capita. At any rate, as it seems, one of the main issues would be, not only for Ukraine, but other countries, is to get to an area of energy efficiency, which is far more common in most other countries.
Thank you very much, John, for your question. It's really a key question for Ukraine moving forward. So let me answer this in two ways. The first is to say that there's some positive trends. For many years, we didn't see a lot of movement in issues of efficiency in Ukraine because the particular way in which energy trade in particular with Russia was structured did not create hard constraints on energy users. We saw that especially in the 1990s, but even up to 2012. When in 2011, 2012, for example, natural gas prices skyrocket as a result of the famous Timoshenko agreements, you start to see actual changes in demand on the Ukrainian side. So there is some improvement there, but the real problem is that energy inefficiency became not only a side effect of those legacies, of those path dependencies of being part of a larger energy-rich system, which was the Soviet Union, but the real problem is that energy inefficiency became really an integral part of the system of subsidies and misused subsidies that played and continue to play an important role in many aspects of the Ukrainian system. So again, let me turn as an example to the coal chapter of this book, where again, the subtitle is Managing Subsidies, because basically what you saw in the coal sector was a situation where maintaining subsidies was crucially integrated with inefficient use of resources, not only at the end when you are as a consumer or as a factory using energy, but inefficient use of resources, for example, in the very decisions about the exploitation of different resources, such as coal. You had a situation in the first 10 years of Ukrainian independence where every international player, World Bank, IMF, was asking Ukraine, please do something about your inefficient mines. But this was not done because of the fear of unemployment, but not only because of that, but it was not done because my heroes, some of my heroes in this book, like Rinat Akhmetov, understood that the fear of unemployment, the fear of negative impact on miners was a political tool that could be used to maintain those subsidies from Kyiv. And what we saw was a situation where for many years, you had many coal mines which were producing at the cost of producing that coal was higher than the money that could be fetched from selling that coal, but it was also the calorie cost of producing that coal was higher than the calories that could be produced by that coal. So that is the real issue. It's not only the issue of end use, and I think very important steps have been taken in that area and will continue to be taken, but it's the question of the way those subsidies related to inefficiency have been so enmeshed with the issue of inefficiency. Now, there is perhaps light at the end of the tunnel when we are talking about those subsidies and how they interface with industrial producers. The European Union is set on establishing a carbon duty. The technical name is the Cross-Border Adjustment Mechanism. And it's going to affect all those industries that have been working on for the last 10 years, not only direct energy industries, but steel making, aluminum, fertilizers, cement, all those industries that depend on fossil fuels, sometimes as feedstock, sometimes as playing a key role in the production process, such as in steel making for certain things in the blast furnace. And when that cross-border carbon tax comes into effect in a way that really gets down to those value chains, producers like Ukraine and companies like the tech Rinat Akhmetov, we'll really have to start looking very, very seriously at the issue of efficiency, because it is closely related to the issue of carbon intensity. So the issue is very hard because it has been very interlaced with subsidies and the misuse of subsidies, but there is a very strong external shock and external pressure coming, and hopefully that will lead important players to be more active in that area.
Thank you again. So the floor is open. Are there any other questions? If you have a question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. Margarita, maybe while waiting for questions, one thing going on here in Washington, everyone's talking about the Russia is massing its troops on the Ukrainian border. So I don't expect you to tell us, are they going to invade or not? But I want to know, do energy politics and Russian energy sales to Europe, is that going to act as a constraint on Russian behavior, or what is the nature of the interdependency here as it affects Russia?
Well, that's a really important question, and that is one of the key reasons why, above and beyond the role of one oligarch or another oligarch, above and beyond the issue of transit fees, which are quote unquote only $1.5 to $2 billion per year, the Ukrainian government has been so keen in retaining its role as a transit state, in particular for natural gas. Because as long as Ukraine remains an important transit state, as long as the energy security, and in particular simply the well-being and the warm temperatures in European homes remain related to something that is happening through Ukraine, there will be an active interest on the part of the European Union to play some kind of triangulating role in the Russian-Ukrainian relationship. If that disappears, I am not sure how strong that commitment will be, because frankly, what we have seen in terms of the European or the US response to the invasion of and taking over of Crimea and Russian military action in eastern Ukraine has not really been very resolute. So I think the Russian players now are considering two factors. One factor is they have seen how the story around Nord Stream 2 has played out. They have seen how very important players in Europe, how very important companies in Europe have put their benefit and the role in Nord Stream 2 above Ukrainian concerns. They have seen this. On the other hand, they also see that if they overplay their hand, as some feel that has been done with some of the manipulations in the European energy market, in gas market in the last couple of months, they may lose the public opinion battle. So I think it acts as a constraint, but I believe that a lot of the discussions and a lot of the ways in which the debate on Nord Stream 2 has played out have convinced Russia that it's not as strong element as it could have been. So that is my my short answer to your question.
Okay, and then if there's no other questions, let me ask one more before we wrap up. How do you see things changing as Europe has committed itself to a transition to a carbon-free economy and obviously moving in the direction of renewables? As you point out, fossil fuels are going to be with us for a long time to come. But how do you see the transition affecting Russia and these supply chains?
It's going to be very, very, very important. Already, if you look, for example, at EU investment policies in the Balkans, so again, this is a small area, but you see that very little is being invested in traditional fossil fuel infrastructure. If the plans of the German coalition, if some of the Fit for 55 of the European Union come into being, that in the medium to long term, that reliance on fossil fuels will not be there. And I think it's going to be a challenge for Russian policymakers to extend that period of reliance on fossil fuels as bridge in the case of natural gas or as something else, but also to solidify Russia's role in some alternative non-fossil fuel supply chain. And of course, here we are talking about a possible role in green hydrogen, export of electricity. So I think these are really very, very important questions that I hope the Russian leadership is considering. And I am not sure how serious thinking is being done there, but I think it will be very important. Western energy companies are thinking about that because they want to maintain the role even through a transition. And I think if Russia wants to continue to play an important role in energy in the long term, it needs to look beyond fossils, or like BP will say, beyond petroleum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just one last question would be then, do you see electricity as playing a major role? I mean, obviously, I think Ukraine is still part of the Russian electrical grid. Is electricity going to be a major component of these things going forward? Is that something you're thinking about doing research on?
Yes. I mean, it's not only going to be important, but it is important. And you mentioned the case of Ukraine. Ukraine is exporting a lot of electricity to the European Union now. It is still not tied to the European grid, which is a very interesting technical issue, but it has created so-called energy islands in Western Ukraine where electricity produced specifically for sale to those markets through those grids is produced. Now, this raises another issue, which is what in EU speak is called carbon leakage. That is the importation of electricity that is produced using less clean sources to the European Union. And that is something that basically Ukraine has benefited from, but that is going to be also affected by the full implementation of the carbon tax. So certainly it will be important, but there are some initiatives in the European Union that will subject those imports to closer scrutiny. But it doesn't mean that there are no opportunities, because there is opportunities for green electricity as well. And I think that needs to be kept in mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think we've come to the end of our hour. So thank you very much for a wonderful presentation and really bringing a lot of these interesting issues to our discussion here in Washington and around the world. So please join me in thanking Margarita. We'll wave our hands. I hope everyone's waving their hands behind their black screen. But thank you very much for your presentation, and look forward to connecting hopefully in person.
Very much hope so, and thank you for the great and very interesting questions and the opportunity to share with a very special community.
All right, take care. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us.